Well, hello, everyone. This is Jonna Ward, and I'm the Executive Director of the Seattle Public Library Foundation. And I just had to say thank you for joining us today. This is quite exciting. There are 90 of you, a combination of supporters and history buffs and future friends of the Library Foundation. We are so excited to share with you some of the treasures that exist within our Seattle Public Library. The library has a vast collection of Pacific Northwest, it's a vast collection, let me just say it that way, of Pacific Northwest historical, it's an archive, and it's growing all the time. And you might have seen in the reel in advance some of the unique things the collection has. You know, special collections are at the heart of any library and why it matters, because it tells us who we are, where we've been, where we've come from, and it really reinforces our unique identity. And there's no better place than to look for where you can find collective community. So special collections are supported by the Library Foundation, whether financially, but through so many incredibly donated items that have come to us. So this is a place where the library can care for really special treasures that will be enjoyed by the community for a very long time. Now, to get you started here, the format today is I'm saying hello, and then we are going to start with our actual program. And then at the end, we have time and opportunity to actually ask live questions of our experts here. And in order to do that, let me give you a little Zoom instruction. So first off, if you have like any kind of technical difficulties, feel free to use the chat button. You might find it across the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer or laptop, or you might find it across the top of your screen if you're on a phone or a tablet. And we have teammates standing by to help with any kind of assistance. And then there's also a Q&A button, and that's a great place if you have questions that come up during the program, drop them in there, and that's what we'll be using to actually talk after the presentation. So to get this all rolling, I just want to say, again, thank you for being here, and I'd like you to sit back and enjoy as we welcome our guests, Ann Ferguson, Andrew Harbison, and the Foundation's own Lindsay Burton. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Jonna, and thank you, supporters, for being here with us today. I'm pleased to welcome Andrew Harbison and Ann Ferguson to talk with us about special collections. Very excited for this conversation. Ann and Andrew, wondering if you can introduce yourself briefly, starting with you, Ann.
Thanks, Lindsay. It's great to be here. I am the curator of the Seattle Collection, which is part of special collections at the Central Library, and I've been there for about 7.5 years.
Excellent. Andrew.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Andrew Hardison. I'm the Assistant Director of Collections and Access at the Seattle Public Library. And I also have been at the Seattle Public Library for about 7.5 years.
Excellent. Now, Ann, wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your work and what you do with special collections.
Sure. Well, as the curator of the Seattle Collection, I'm responsible for expanding the collection. That's both through purchasing material as well as through donations. In addition, I also work up in the Seattle room where the Seattle Collection is housed, helping researchers. So whoever comes into that room, whether it's a scholar who's coming in to use our material for an extended period, or just someone in the community who happened to find their way up to the 10th floor and wandered into the Seattle Collection, along with my colleagues, I share time up on that desk helping researchers.
All right, Andrew, what is your purview with special collections?
My role with special collections is I have general oversight of the department and the strategic direction of the department. The Seattle Room and Special Collections represents one of 5 service priorities for the Seattle Public Library, which is titled the Seattle Culture and History Service Priority. And what that means is we're really emphasizing this as an area that we want to focus on in developing the collection, which Ann obviously does, as well as administering access to the collection and providing research and reference services to using the collection to really help anyone who's interested in the history of Seattle and the region to learn more about it.
Now, Anne, does your work require any kind of special training to be a keeper of these historical documents and curate and archive everything?
Well, in general, folks who are curators of collections often have or generally have an advanced library degree, graduate degree, and generally also have either a master's or a PhD in a subject field. In my case, I have a PhD in theater history and dramatic literature, and then I got my library degree at Columbia University, which had a special rare book program, an archival program, so I went through that. So I chose Columbia just because I knew I wanted to specialize in curatorship.
Before we talk more about the details of the special collection, can you give us a brief overview of kind of the scope of what you're working with there?
Sure. Well, the Special Collections Department covers more than just the Seattle collection. We have a rare book collection. We have an aviation collection, a large genealogy collection. Our book collection is not something that we continue to produce materials for. It's basically a collection that has developed over the years. First of all, the library's been around a long time, so some of the very early purchases are now very rare or scarce materials. And in addition, we've been really blessed with wonderful donations from community members who've given us some very rare and unique materials. An example of an item in the rare book collection is we have an ornithology book from 1599 that has woodcuts of birds. And it's a beautiful book. It's a wonderful thing when people come into the collection, they want to know what's one of the oldest things you have here. We can bring it up because visually it's just so interesting. So that's, you know, the rare book collection is exciting in that way for people. They love seeing something that old, and especially in this digital age, to be able to handle something like that is wonderful. The aviation collection was developed as a partnership between Boeing and the Seattle Public Library. And it was to make a collection of aviation materials available widely to the public. And so we have that collection. When people come to the Seattle room, they can request aviation material. We now bring it up and they can use it up in the reading room. The genealogy collection is really quite something. It's one of the largest genealogy collections in the Pacific Northwest. Very, very heavily used. We have two fantastic genealogists. They do not only serve people in the Seattle community, but we get questions from all across the country, and they work with patrons everywhere. And we have the Albert Balch collection, which is an autograph collection. Albert Balch was a developer in Seattle, the Greenwood area, and he started collecting autographs as soon as he got out of college, went to the Republican National Convention in 1928 and collected all kinds. And Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, and Mussolini. So it's an interesting collection. So that's also part of our overall special collections. The Seattle collection is really an incredible collection that documents the history of Seattle and then more broadly, the region. It has books, manuscripts, photographs, postcards, menus, sheet music, scrapbooks, photo albums, you name it. If it's related to Seattle history, we're interested in it. So it's this really extraordinary collection. I have to say that when, you know, I spent my whole career in academic libraries. I was at Yale and Cornell and the University of Washington. And when I came over to the Seattle collection, I was so impressed with the depth and the breadth of this collection. It's really quite extraordinary for a local history collection. So we're very lucky. The community is very lucky. And the way we're set up is that we're located up on the 10th floor of the library, which is a great location, highest level where the spiral starts. So lots of people arrive up there. They don't even know we exist, and there we are. And we tend to have pop-up exhibits around to draw people in. And we have our own reading room, and there's also an open stack area. And that's something that's very unusual for a special collection, to have stacks that patrons can actually go and wander and look and discover things for themselves. And most academic libraries, they want to be open and they welcome people, the general public, but it can be intimidating to come in and have to turn in your backpack, sign in, and a lot of people just won't do it. So this is one of the great gifts of this Collection, and it's one of the things I love most about working there. I love most about being at Seattle Collection because I feel like it's really the community's collections, and people feel that. They come in, they wander, and they go, I can just walk in there? We said, sure. And then they say, what kind of things? And, you know, if it's someone just from the community, will say, we have the Seattle, all the high school yearbooks from all the Seattle public schools. We have early city directories. We have scrapbooks, you know, whatever you'd like to see. So it's unique that way, and it's one of the most wonderful things about the Seattle Collection.
Well, I know we are truly lucky in Seattle to have such a fantastic collection. It always blows me away, the depth of the treasures that we have there. So on that note of people swinging by, what kind of people stop into the Seattle room, and what are some of the requests you're tasked with when people come in?
It's so interesting because it's a wide range. As I mentioned, we have people who just happen to come up and find us. On the other end of the scale, we have researchers who are writing books, you know, for instance, on the Ship Canal or on Denny Regrade. Someone was writing the history of St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral. So those researchers are often in the collection for months or sometimes years at a time doing research. So we are often very down in the weeds, trying to help them find sometimes very obscure information, a research question they might have. And so in that case, the collection gets used really in a lot of depth, I would say. We also have some wonderful examples. The person who's thought to be the first Chinese resident in Seattle, his name is Chung and he came to Seattle in 1860, first worked in Yesler's Mill, and then set up his own general merchandise store. And his great-great-great-granddaughter contacted us, and she's a writer, and she was wanting to research her great-great-great-grandfather. So she came up and spent several weeks up there. We ended up working closely with her. We had her give a talk, you know, and so this was just this wonderful thing, not only for her, but for us, uncovering this history. We've also had one of my favorites because of my theater background. I was sitting up in the Seattle room, and this lovely woman comes up, and she's asking me if I've ever heard of Fannie Morgan Phelps. Now, I promise you, there's nobody else you could have walked up to that would have known who Fannie Morgan Phelps was, but I did, because Fannie Morgan Phelps and her troupe gave the first full-length Shakespearean production in Seattle in 1875. And because we had the Shakespeare First Folio exhibit a few years ago, I gave a talk on Shakespeare in Seattle, and I already knew about Fannie, but I got to know a lot more. So she was so delighted, and so I still have correspondence with her, and she's been doing research. She wants to write a book about her great-great-aunt. I will tell you probably, this is a story that is probably the most emotional in terms of helping someone in the collection. We have a wonderful program with Seattle Central College, where students in English 101 and 102 classes are assigned to write a research paper on some aspect of Seattle history. And the students, the faculty members we work with, they select what they think are the best papers at the end of the semester and give them to us to catalog and have in the collection. And it's a wonderful thing for the students, obviously. And back in 2017, it was 5 o'clock at night, and in came this young woman, and she said, I think my paper may be in this collection. Her name is Anna Taylor, and I asked her if I could tell her story, because I thought you might ask me about someone who's used the collection. And Anna had grown up in a small village in Serbia. Parents didn't even have a high school degree, left to go to Dubai to become a flight attendant to support her family for 8 years, ultimately gets married, ends up here in Seattle, and starts college, starts at Seattle Central. And by the time she's come into the room with me, she's actually starting to apply to a four-year university. And she asked me if I could take a picture of her holding her paper because she wants to send it to her mother. And she got all teary talking about it. She also said that writing this paper, she lived in the old colony. It's that old apartment building up on Bourne that had been converted into condos. She was living there, and she wrote about the history of that building. And she said it made her feel for the first time that she belonged in Seattle, writing this paper. And she also said that the research help she got in writing it gave her more confidence about her ability to do her applications, because she's a math science person. She was worried about applying. anyway, I tracked her down this week. She just graduated magna cum laude in computer science from Seattle University. And she talked again in my exchange with her about how honored she was that her paper was in the Seattle collection. So I guess in terms of patrons I worked with, that's the one that I think moves me the most.
That's so wonderful. Thank you for that story. Thank you for following up. That's incredible to learn. Now, you've mentioned people bringing donations to special collections. Is there a process for that? If people say, hey, I have some stuff that you may want to check out, what is someone's recourse for doing that?
The best way for someone to offer to make a donation is to go through our Ask a Librarian. It's on the front page of our Seattle Public Library. You can just click on that. You can send an email. And if you're offering to donate something to the Seattle collection, that'll get forwarded immediately to me. And then I will have a conversation with you about what it is you're offering. It's how we get many, many wonderful donations is through that. Sometimes someone's offering something as simple as early Sonics ticket to the first Sonics game here in Seattle. It can be just a single item, or it can be, a donation was the O'Hanrahan family, Irish family archive. A woman had this, I won't tell you the whole story of how she got it, but she ended up with this collection. One of them was a socialist who had a soapbox down in Pioneer Square where he sold socialist newspapers. Another one started a ballroom here in Seattle, big Catholic family, they went to St. Joe's. And so we have all these photographs, family letters. So that was a donation that now gives us a really wonderful glimpse into Seattle in the first couple of decades of the 20th century. So it can be books, it can be postcards, it can be anything you can think of that would relate to Seattle history, sheet music. Menus. I love our menu collection. It's huge, thousands. We have a 1904 vegetarian cafe down on Union Street in our collection. So anything, rock posters, anything, we're interested. So, please, anyone who's listening today, I would love to talk to you about anything that you might have in your collection. The worst thing is when someone comes into the room, Seattle room, and says, oh, I didn't know anybody would want this kind of thing. I just got rid of, and they tell me they just got rid of something. So please, before you get rid of anything, think about the Seattle collection.
Absolutely. Think about Seattle Public Library before Goodwill, maybe. Now, about do you have any kind of rough ratio in mind of how much of your intake is donated materials versus purchases?
Thanks to the Foundation, there's a very generous budget for purchasing material. So I would say it might be 50-50 in terms of what comes in as donation versus what I've done. Although I would say maybe I purchase more than we donate, but it just depends. Sometimes I get a huge donation in. And, I think we're going to be talking about a major donation we've just had. And so in that case, that's bigger than anything I'll ever collect. So, that's sort of an interesting question. And I guess I don't have a completely straight answer on that.
You read my mind on the next question, and I'll kick this next one to Andrew because I know recently we had such a huge, meaningful, really special donation recently from Mr. Paul Dorpat. And Andrew, can you please elaborate on this wonderful contribution?
Sure, absolutely. Happy to. And just to tell you a little bit more about Paul Dorpat, he is such an important figure in Seattle history. He's truly a public historian, a huge user of the Seattle Public Library, an advocate for the Seattle Public Library. And some of his work includes writing, I think, nearly 2,500 now and then columns for the Seattle Times, which kind of compare different periods of history with the Seattle of today. He also ran an underground newspaper called the Helix in the late 60s, and also was a co-founder of the incredible website History Link, which documents a lot of important history in the city of Seattle and the region. So Paul has just been an incredible user and advocate for the library, and in his work of writing and kind of collecting the history of Seattle, he amassed a tremendous collection. And when he was figuring out what to do with it, he thought of the Seattle Public Library and the Seattle Room. And we're very fortunate that he wanted to donate these materials to us to enhance the collection that we have and really make sure it's accessible to anyone, as Anne had pointed out, who wants to use that, whether they're researching to write a book or researching to write a student paper. All of those many different types of patrons and uses are really important to really celebrate and understand the rich history of Seattle and the region. And just to give you a sense of Paul's donation, it's really extensive. A huge donation of historical books, including a first edition of Clarence Bagley's 3-volume set of the history of Seattle, and Arthur Denny's first edition of Pioneer Days on Puget Sound. And then many different other memorabilia, ephemera, photographs, negatives, papers, all of the research he did and notes he took to prepare his stories in the Seattle Times, the Now and Then pieces. Just an incredible amount of material, I believe amounting to nearly 80 boxes, which is just tremendous. And we are just now starting to get into the collection to see what's there and to organize it and make it accessible for future users, which I should note will take a fair amount of time. So Anne and other staff in special collections will be carefully sorting these materials as they do any other materials we purchase or receive as donations to make it sensible in its organization and make sure it's easily found and accessed to for generations to come. So yes, we're thrilled to have Paul's donation, and it's really, really important in documenting and expanding the documentation of the city.
Wonderful. Andrew, are there any items that really stood out to you? Like, wow, I didn't know this existed, or this is so crazy that he had this?
There are so many, but a few, I mentioned a few of the first edition books, which were just tremendously valuable to have those first editions. One of them, speaking of Clarence Bagley, was a textbook from his daughter, Myrta, and had been in Paul's collection. But what makes it really special is you see some of the notes that Myrta Bagley recorded in this textbook, including some personal drawings. And I think, that just speaks to how rich some of these materials are. You have the documents themselves, but also some of the individual notes and some of the accompanying, marginalia that's associated with the material. And those sorts of things just really make those materials shine all that more and make them that much more meaningful. I'd also say there's been some really incredible photograph collections I've been able to find in my quick review of some of the materials in the boxes, including Frank Shaw's photographs, who was a local photographer and documented many different types of things around the city and the region. And then also another photographer named Howard Sykes, who took thousands of photographs of nature, surrounding nature, landscapes, flowers, and these are Kodachrome slides, so they're just really magnificent and really important.
Excellent. It's striking to me how much of the collection is supported by generous donors. It truly makes it a community collection, and to me anyway, that is really special. And supporters will be sure to update you on when Paul Dorpat's collection is available for viewing and access. Now, I would like to take a moment to talk about this interesting moment in time where Special Collections is working on history's intersection with current events. And that's, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic and your collection efforts on that front to document community stories in this special time in history. And Anne, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that effort.
Sure. Our digital projects librarian, Jade Dario, is the person who's been responsible for creating the community COVID-19 collection to make it accessible for people to contribute. We welcome everyone to send us something that represents what they're going through. It can be something they want to write out, a narrative. It could be a story. It could be a poem. It could be a piece of music. We're just interested in helping to document what this period is like for our community. And one way I like to think about it is, I think people are now very familiar with the 1980 flu epidemic that we had here in Seattle and around the country. And how wonderful would it be if we had something like that where we could go back and really have a sense of what daily life was like for people during that, what kinds of things they were doing. So we've had quite a few contributions. They're fascinating to read. We have young children. I have all ages. There's a lovely haiku poem from a little boy. One of the ones that I've found most moving is a woman was diagnosed with cancer during COVID and writes about the difficulty and the stress of having to go to the hospital for treatments during this period and the risks that she was taking and the stress that she was under and what the daily routine was like. So sharing that, we have photographs of some of the marches that have been taking place in the protest. So there's, people are sending in songs that they've written. So, artwork, some pictures of some of the art out on the streets. So it's a real wide range material. And we just love the idea that people can submit anything they want that they feel reflects what they're going through.
Wonderful. And I know people can still submit. Yes. How do they do that?
Yes, absolutely. If you go to the homepage for the Seattle Public Library and you just search COVID-19 Community Collection, you'll get taken right to the page.
I've looked through it myself, and I have to say my favorite is a documentation of watching every Richard Gere film and her review for each film. That was
yeah, right. That is
comic relief.
Nice to have a little balance, right? Yes, yes.
Absolutely. The serious stories you mentioned and the ways people are figuring out how to cope. Indeed. Mm-hmm. Now, Anne, is this something that Special Collections has ever done before, collecting historical documents and stories in real time?
In a way, this is a first for us to do this, where it's open and individuals just can submit. So it's a new thing for us, but we've been very happy with how successful it's been. So it was an experiment, and other institutions we're starting to try and figure this out. We talked to them, looked at what they were doing. There's a legal piece to it. People can contribute anonymously if they want. And so there's a lot of things to sort out, but we managed to get it out there, and I think it's been it is a wonderful thing for the collection.
I'm excited to see what comes of it. Indeed. Now, we've talked about donations. Before COVID-19, of course, how else do you acquire material for the collection?
So I am very lucky. I get to spend my time working with dealers, for the most part, who have collections of material, all kinds of material that they are selling. And many of them I now have relationships with, so I get contacted daily. Just over the weekend, I had a dealer that I purchased from. She knows I'm very interested in ethnic material. One of the things that I'm really trying to do with the collection is make sure that we're representing all parts of the community. And she was sending me an offer of a 1936 yearbook that was put out by a local Seattle Japanese newspaper. And the yearbook lists, so this is pre-internment, it lists all of the businesses, Japanese businesses in Seattle and also elsewhere on the West Coast. So sometimes it's a dealer coming to me with something very specific. And there are also book fairs, which I would normally be going to in person, but the book world has pivoted, dealers have pivoted, and now there are virtual book fairs. And I've actually purchased quite a bit that way. There was the LA virtual book fair, there's been several others, and got to get in there fast. One of the problems is what gets sold stays up, so you know what you miss. Whereas when you're in the physical one, you walk around, they hide the things they've already sold. You don't get disappointed. But anyway, I continue to purchase. I've been surprised, to be honest, is how much I can continue to do my work on a regular basis. And that goes for donations as well. For instance, last week I got contacted by someone who was literally selling their house, and they had some original Olmsted Brother landscape plans for some Seattle homes, and she needed to get rid of them now. So we worked out a way for her to drive them down to the library, get them dropped off. So we're just kind of doing the best we can in the current situation.
That's so great to know your work is still able to continue in that way. I didn't know that, so that's great. Now, you mentioned being interested in a diversity of materials and wanting to represent our entire history and population. What perspective or priorities do you bring to the table when you're collecting material?
Well, I would say that, you know, the collection, not that we don't have material in there that represents all of the community, but if you look at Native Americans, Japanese, African American, some of our newer immigrant populations. So I've been lucky. We've had some good, wonderful donations. Reverend Samuel McKinney from Mount Zion Church, his daughter graciously has given us material related to Reverend McKinney and his work. That's a wonderful, wonderful addition to the collection. We also, another donation, Jonathan Moore, a very respected hip hop artist from Seattle. His mother has donated some of the material from his collection. And that's another thing, you know, I collect material going back all the way to when Washington was part of Oregon Territory, and then Washington Territory, and then Washington State. The further back in time, the more broadly we collect. But we don't want to neglect what's happening now. So, you know, Jonathan Moore, a hip hop artist, we want it to include that too. So, so it's a balancing act. You know, you know, you need, in most cases, you often need to make connections with members of the community to make sure that you are bringing that in. That's also true for the LGBTQ community. We want to make sure that we're representing that community as well. So that, I would say right now, that's the highest priority. It doesn't mean that if someone offers me like a very cool Washington Territory item, you know, I just recently brought in this wonderful little album that Rosamond Densmore of Densmore Avenue. She was on a jury in 1884 in Washington Territory. Women were allowed on juries then, and they made them not be on juries for quite a while. And anyway, she had all the judges and the other people working sign this album, including some of the other women jurors. And now we have that in the collection. So I'm not going to pass up on those things, but I will say I have put a big emphasis on trying to represent those members of our community who I don't think are as widely represented in the collection as we would like them to be.
Now, Anne, on a personal level, I know your family has a deep-rooted history in Washington State. And so looking through that lens, I wonder if you can talk about what this Northwest Special Collections means to you and why it's so important to maintain these wonderful archives.
Well, you're right. I do have deep ties here. I'm a fourth generation Washingtonian. My great-grandparents homesteaded up on the Skagit. And I grew up here in Seattle in a large family, actually just a few blocks from the Queen Anne Branch Library, where I spent a lot of my childhood. You know, Seattle's history, this region's history is my personal history. And I have to say that when this position of curated Seattle Collection came open, it was a big decision sort of to leave an academic libraries, which had been sort of all I had really worked in. But when I saw that position, I thought, I just have to at least try it. The idea of being able to spend my days working the Seattle Collection, it's just a dream. So, but you know, I think there's something in that collection for all of us. And, you know, soon after I started working there, I said to one of my daughters, I said, oh, you know, I'm going to leave the UW. I'm going to move over to the Seattle Collection. I started to explain it. And she goes, oh, I've been there. I said, you've been there? I've never taken you there. She goes, oh, grandfather took me there. My dad. She said, you know, after we moved here, he thought I should know what our neighborhood looked like before our house was built. We have a 1907 house. So the Sanborn maps down, he brought her in there, taken out the Sanborn maps and centered her in the history of Seattle, of where she was living in our neighborhood. And there's something that changes how you see the world around you. I think how you see Seattle, how you see Washington, how you see the region, when you can delve into these things and you know our history. You know, and then I took the Seattle Mountaineers basic climbing course when I was in high school. So I've done a lot of backpacking and climbing. So the other thing is the whole region of, you know, our mountains, our water, the environment, all of that is tied up in this collection as well. So I just think that and also you look at that Anna Taylor who moved here. She had no connection to this place. But by researching that building and getting herself rooted here, she said, I now feel like I belong here. So I guess I think that the Seattle Collection helps people feel like they belong here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, of course, many of our supporters here, their generosity helps make Special Collections work possible. I'm wondering if either of you can expand on how important foundation support is to your work and what donors help provide on that front.
Foundation support of the Seattle Room and Special Collections is tremendous. It's the primary budget for building the collection. And so we really see the benefits of that every day as Anne is researching and finding new materials to purchase and acquire, and of course to supplement what many of our generous patrons and users and donors want to offer us out of their personal collections. And so the funding is really tremendous. It allows the collection to really grow. It also, just to recap what Anne was focusing on in terms of diversifying the collection, really enables us to expand the diversity of perspectives and experiences represented in the collection in a way that's inclusive and more comprehensive than we would otherwise be able to achieve. And I think it's going to be just as important as ever as we continue to learn more about our history to be able to kind of fill in the gaps that we encounter over time.
Excellent.
The other thing that I want to mention is, and Andrew, you could probably speak to this as well, is that the Seattle Room itself is actually the Hugh and Jane Ferguson room. And that was thanks to a very large donation from Hugh and Jane Ferguson, who were big supporters of the library. Hugh had a Northwest book collection, which is now part of our collection as well. And it's thanks to them and that donation that we actually have the Seattle Room, where the stacks are, as well as the reading room. So just a tremendous gift to even just let us have the physical space to house this collection.
Yeah, absolutely. The Fergusons were longtime supporters of the Seattle Public Library and really established the foundation that we're continuing to build on in terms of, again, expanding the collection and expanding access to the collection. The Fergusons had a tremendous interest in local history, collecting books on Northwest history, many of which were donated to the collection as part of their donation to the library. And they were very interested in ensuring that others could learn from those materials for many years to come.
I also understand donors have supported special projects such as the conservation or display of works by Edward Curtis, by Charles Wilkes. Can you talk more about that?
The foundation has been very generous. Individual donors have helped to, in the case of Edward Curtis's North American Indian, the 20-volume set, the library was an original subscriber to that set. So the volumes have been here a long time. They were handled frequently. So the cases in which they were housed really needed, we're no longer protecting the volumes in the way that we needed. And so thanks to the foundation donors, beautiful clamshell boxes were made to house these, protects them. Besides just being a beautiful way to present the volumes, it now preserves them in a way that will protect them for years and years to come. The Wilkes, Charles Wilkes, we're very lucky. We have the Wilkeses, this is the U.S. exploring expedition, 1838 to 1840s. And we have volumes from that set, but they were in poor condition. And so we really couldn't let people handle them. They needed to be protected. The bindings need to be conserved and preserved. So that work was done. And now they're just beautiful, beautiful bound volumes that we can show to patrons, and they can be handled. And so that kind of work is just a gift to the community to be able to have that kind of protection of our really valuable materials.
Now, Andrew, of course, the Seattle Room is an incredible resource at the Seattle Public Library, but can you tell us about the digital collections and how people can access those from their homes or anywhere?
Absolutely. The digital collection allows us to expand access to anyone who has a computer and who may not be able to get into the library, which is obviously more important now than ever during the pandemic. The digital collection consists of over 100,000 scans of a wide range of materials that people can experience in a very rich and interactive way. And we're very fortunate to have the foundation support some of the platform costs with those collections, as well as to build some of our digital archives, including the entire run of the Seattle Times Historical Archive, and the beginning of the Seattle PI archive, which we're hoping to introduce in 2021.
And I know Special Collections has engaged in some in-person learning opportunities and some excellent formal education that is really enriching to students locally. Wondering if you can tell us a little more about that work.
Sure. That's one of the parts of our work that we really love in the Special Collections Department. We work with classes of all ages of students. We have every year first graders come into our collection, and we have a whole setup of materials for them. We also work with graduate students. Most recently, we worked with several classes of graduate students at Seattle University that are developing a website, arts ecosystem of Seattle, documenting the arts in Seattle from Century 21 on. And we work with this, we have a presentation, have the material there, but then we continue to work with students and the faculty after that. We worked recently with a retired professional group, members of the community who are now retired and go on field trips, and they came to the Seattle collection. And out of that, we had a wonderful donation of material from someone who attended that. And that was just to introduce them to the Seattle collection. One of the ones recently that I found particularly compelling was a high school class. They were studying the idea of citizenship, and they came into the Seattle collection, and we looked at things like Japanese internment and what happened with citizenship with our Japanese community members, and looked at, what is citizenship? What does it mean? We have new immigrants coming into our community. So it was a really interesting conversation, and we pulled lots of different material, a lot of diverse material for them. Another one that I really found to be wonderful was we worked with a group of Native American students who were researching Licton Springs, which is a sacred site for the Duwamish. And they were trying to get Seattle to designate Licton Springs as a landmark. And they needed to do all the research, though, to document it and make a case for why it should. So they came into the Seattle Room, and we pulled lots of material for them, and we worked with them through their experience. Other members of the library community were working with them as well. But that was a really, I thought, powerful use of the collection and a group of students that came in, and we worked with them. So those are just a few examples of some of the programs that we do.
Well, Anne, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and to offer your insight on this important work. And now, supporters, we will turn it over to you for your questions.
All right, everyone, we're going to do a little transition here. And I see at least the microphones of Andrew, Anne, and thank you, Lindsay, for doing that. So I'm going to ask Andrew and Anne to turn on your cameras and your mics. There you are. There's our rock stars. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. So let me just a little bit of time check here. We have about 15 minutes to make it to officially 12, but you've got a lot of questions that have come in. So I'm hoping you can stay a little longer. And for any of our guests who have to peel away at noon, feel free to do it. And others who can stay longer, we're here. So thank you for that. So let me just get a few of these questions in front of us. And maybe some of these you've answered as time has gone by, because I'm going to start with some of the original questions. So feel free to modify your answers. But one of the questions was, like, what are you looking for right now that you just love to have added to the collection?
That's a great question. As I think I mentioned in when I spoke earlier, I am particularly interested in making sure that the collection represents our diverse community. So any material, current or more historic, that relates to our communities of color, recent immigrant groups, so on, I'd be particularly interested in that. But I'm also very interested in capturing material that documents current events or papers of people who are doing things currently, organizations that are involved with current politically, socially, so on in Seattle. So, you know, it's hard to say that there's one area I'm most interested in, but I would guess I would say that sort of diversifying the collection. And also, I think people often think about collections like this only being interested in really historical material. And I want to make sure people understand that, you know, if you have an event, if there's a rock poster, whatever, we're interested in those kinds of things too. Obviously, the more significant and things that have more research value are of interest, but you know, ephemera is important. We do lots of exhibits, so sometimes, you know, just a single item could be the perfect thing for us to have in an exhibit. So I guess that's my general answer to that.
Well, and you answered one of the other questions, because there was that related to, do you want stuff from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s and all, versus just old things? So yes, the question is yes. You've talked a lot today about the donations, and we always appreciate that. But there's some questions about like security and protecting your collection from fire and how you house it. And do you want to talk just about some of that logistics of what that looks like in the Seattle room as well as in Central Library?
Sure, I can talk generally, and then Andrew, I'll let you talk more generally about the library. The Seattle room is up on the 10th floor, as I mentioned. And we have the stack area and the reading room. So the stack area, within it, for protection of our most valuable materials, we have glass cases that are locked so that those, anytime someone wants to see something there, which we're more than happy to pull anything out of there, we actually will unlock those glass doors, bring out the items, and people do give us their ID and fill out a form while they're using those really rare and valuable materials. When the collection is, when we're not open for patrons to come in to do research, the stack area is locked, is securely locked. So we have good protection of that room. The other thing is, not all of the Seattle collection fits it to the Seattle room proper. So we have compact storage on another level. And there are some items which are either very fragile physically, we don't want people being able to handle them without some support or help, or they're just also very valuable, and we just want an added layer of protection that we know someone's not just taking them off the shelf, but that we are bringing them up to them. So more to our fire, you know, suppression systems and so on that are also there to protect the collection.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. I'll just jump in quickly to say that it's a great question, and there's always a little bit of a balance to strike between access, security, preservation. All of these are of great interest and importance to the library. We certainly want to preserve these materials for many, many, many years to come, and can do that by taking security precautions, but also want to make sure that they're accessed and used and contribute to, you know, the learning and awareness around the Seattle history and kind of just general public service. And so that's something that we're always discussing. And as Anne pointed out, we have a number of different measures in place to ensure the security of the collection, and in particular, security of those materials that are rare and or particularly valuable. And the entire architecture of the Central Library is actually very sophisticated in terms of its fire suppression systems and other earthquake retrofitting in its infrastructure. And so we believe that the collection's very secure in the building, but that doesn't mean that we're always looking for ways of improving that security, while also finding ways to provide access. And a quick point about access is that that can also be extended through our digital collections. So, you know, if something's particularly valuable, reproducing it in a digital format enables people to use it without necessarily compromising, you know, the material itself. So I think that's another important aspect to build on why digital services are particularly important now during the pandemic. And I'll quickly also add that we were very fortunate to have a grant from the foundation to enhance some of our security measures over the last few years. And so that's really built our confidence even further with how we're managing the materials and resources there.
So two tips, two thoughts. If you haven't, you should go to spl.org, Seattle Room, and make sure to poke around the online collections. And once you start to see what's there, you're going to build a list of all the things you want to actually come in and actually touch, see, feel, see Andrew, see Anne on site when the library reopens. So I want to add just one last thing. And so many people who have experienced, say, any of your materials, it's the kind of situation you come in, you don't have to have the white gloves. You're not in a locked room. It's a way that you really can connect with materials. And that's such a unique aspect of the public library. Now, that kind of leads into another series of questions around how the library works with folks like MoHI and what belongs at Wing Luke and what's best to go to special collections at UW. Kind of talk about where stuff lives and how you all work together.
Sure, that's a good question. And I think for people who are considering donations, sometimes that's something that they're interested in. Who should I go to with something I have? We have relationships, obviously, with UW Special Collections, with MoHI, Wing Luke, and there's times where we actually partner on different things. We did a partnership with the Wing Luke Museum when Special Collections was sponsoring a History Cafe talk, which is, we were partnering with MoHI on History Cafe talks, and it was about Wing Luke. Wing Luke's sister was on the panel as other folks who knew Wing Luke. And so we did that in partnership with them. In terms of the collections, I think we recognize the strengths that each of the institutions in the city have in terms of holdings. So for instance, the University of Washington Special Collections has an amazing moving image collection. And they have Hannah Palin, who is amazing and an expert in that. So I would say if you had a major moving image collection, then you'd really want to be talking University of Washington. And the other thing I'll say is that University of Washington Special Collections, they collect for the entire Pacific Northwest. So if you're getting outside the state of Washington, you definitely want to be going to them. You know, we do collect for not just Seattle, more broadly Washington State, but there's certain things that would be better with them versus us. And I would say the best way to do that is to, contact me, for instance. And I sometimes will say to someone, University of Washington Special Collection actually has this major collection related to what you have. You have a small piece of something that really should be there. We don't want to have researchers having to be, going to UW and then coming over here to find some small connection. That said, there's plenty of subject areas in which we both have strong holdings. So I think anyone who is interested in terms of donations, feel free to contact me. And this works with all of us, all the institutions. We sort of respect that part of recognizing who what repository would be the best one for some material.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, the questions just keep rolling in. This is fantastic. Let's see, for just during COVID, during right now? And will you repeat where you said people should contact you or using the Ask a Librarian to get questions about specific things?
Sure. On the homepage, the library's homepage, if you scroll down, you'll see it says Ask a Librarian. You can click on that and it gives you a couple of options. You can chat or you can, the best thing is click on email and you'll be able to send an email right from there. And the most important thing to say is, I'm interested in donating something to this Seattle collection, or I'd like to talk with someone in the Seattle room, because that email then gets directly sent over to us. Even if you didn't mention that, they would read your email and they'd figure out, oh, this really needs to go to the Seattle Special Collections Department. We will get those very quickly. We usually respond within 48 hours. So that is the best way to contact us now about anything. If you want to know which digital collection would be best for your research, if you want us to do some genealogy work for you, whatever, that would be the way to contact us.
Excellent, excellent. Now we have one of our guests who wants to know about checking out materials. How do you handle that question when it comes up?
Yeah, so access to the actual physical collection is something that we're working on as we move through the reopening stages, and all of which are in compliance with state and city guidelines. And, you know, for the time being, we're really pointing people in the direction to the digital services that we're able to provide currently. And in many cases, that means that Anne or other folks on the special collections team can do the research, provide you with information, sometimes be able to even reproduce or digitize or scan specific documents if they're really, you know, related to a line of inquiry a patron has. But eventually we're going to be able to provide some physical access to the building and the collection, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done to figure out how to do that in a safe and careful way to make sure, you know, our patrons and our staff are safe, and you know, we can meet the guidelines that are set forth to us. So we're hoping to be able to share some of those developments early next year.
And it's fair to say, isn't it, that you literally cannot check materials out of special collections, but you want to talk about how you loan them, because I know one of our comments was around the loans of Curtis materials to the Seattle Art Museum for their special exhibit.
Yes, that's true. We do for with other institutions in special cases, for instance, an exhibit, we will loan that material. And Andrew could probably speak to some of this too. There is a whole process for that. We'll document it. There's paperwork that goes along with that. And we've done that with MoHi as well. So yes, but I would say we aren't doing sort of traditional interlibrary loan where an individual in Connecticut who's interested in a book of ours could request it from the library and have it sent to them. It would be this sort of institutional exchange that we participate in.
Excellent, excellent. Another question about volunteering opportunities. Is there a role for volunteers within special collections?
We have had some volunteers. Anne Mandela, I think, Andrew, you can correct me if I'm not right, is the person who coordinates volunteers in the library. And it's a little bit, she's the person what your interests are, and for her to determine whether or not there's a match in special collections for what you're interested in doing.
Good, good. All right, so it's a pretty specialized body of work, and it's an important piece of work, and so there's a small but mighty group of library staff that are really keepers of this. We're right at the 12 o'clock hour, but there's still a few more questions, and here's a stumper I wanted to say. Is the Helix indexed? I mean, can one easily find all the articles that, say, Tom Robbins wrote? Okay, I'm feeling like I should know what that is, but I do not. Do either of you? Are you familiar with the Helix?
The Helix is the underground newspaper that Paul Dorpat started in the late 60s. I think it went through a couple years, maybe to the beginning of the 1970s. and some of which are actually, or portions of it are available on Paul Dorpat's website. But in terms of it being indexed, and I'm not sure if I'm aware, I haven't heard of it being indexed.
No, I think you're right. There's some things available online, not only through Paul's site and elsewhere, not the full set. What I'm going to recommend to the person who asked that question is that's a perfect Ask a Librarian question, because we can give you all the details of that. And we are, because we are receiving the Helix as part of Paul's generous gift, this is something we're very interested in as well. And so we're trying to assess what is out there already and what we might be able to do to digitize it and index it and make it available. So Ask a Librarian is the best place right now to get that fully answered.
Okay, I missed that piece, so thank you for clarifying that. Here's just some nice kudos for you, all of you, from Arthur, that just a quick thank you to SPL and the special collection staff. My family and I learned so much about our late mother by looking at her high school yearbook. And now I'm involved in a nonprofit group that is planning to donate our archives to SPL. And I know that MT and others are helping us with that. So thank you, Arthur. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So kudos to all of you. There's one question, if this want to go a little bit deeper, and this goes back to the flu pandemic, 1918 to 1919, and how it impacted the library. And what do you have in the collection that is a tool that like helps see what was going on? And want to go a little deeper on that subject area?
Sure. Well, that's an interesting question in terms of how it impacted the library. We, as part of our special collections holdings, we do have the library archives. And actually, because we've been in COVID and I haven't been back in the building since March 13th, I haven't been able to go in and actually look at, for instance, for the library, which it will be really interesting to do to see what the actual impact on the library was. We do have we have a number of sources, and some of them would be in our digital archives, digital collections of newspaper, magazines, other things that have been digitized that would provide glimpses. We have the Seattle Times full text during that period that you can access. And that is obviously one of the best sources for seeing what was happening in Seattle. So I guess I would say if someone's really just interested in using our Seattle Times database, which you can access from the library's list of online resources, would be your best bet for that. I think we have photos, but because it wasn't as well documented, right, as we're trying to document COVID-19 right now. So, but if that person wants to know the full extent of what we could point them to, again, Ask a Librarian would be the best place for that, and we'd be happy to do that. And I'm guessing, I think we've already received some questions like that, and we could provide more detail.
Perfect, perfect. I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'll just share some closing information. So, could you address the trade-off in expanding your collection with capacity and storage? And then how the library is planning for additional space in the years to come for other purchases?
This is a really, really great question. Unlike the general circulating collection, which is kind of a constantly changing makeup of materials as new materials get published, things go out of date. Special collections in our archives are really unique because we typically just keep everything and the collection just continues to grow. Some of that, I think, is enabled by repurposing the space and thinking about organizing it differently. As Anne pointed out, we do have some closed stacks in the building and compact storage, which allows us to really utilize space a little bit more efficiently to continue to grow the collection. And I think at the same time, we've looked at the central library, looked at different spaces in the building, and have had some conversations about, okay, where else could we, in the building, could we use to kind of accommodate the collection as it continues to grow? We also did acquire a new property property in South Seattle in the Sodo area that we're also just beginning the process of renovating, and that might afford some opportunity for some offsite storage as well. So really good question, and I think it also bumps up against the security and preservation aspects of managing the collection as well that we'll have to factor in. But we're always looking for more space, but also looking how to organize our material more effectively and make it accessible digitally as well, which can also open up some means of storing the material in a more efficient manner. So.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, oh, you guys, we can keep going because you have so many things to share and tell, but I'm going to cut us off. And I just want to say thank you, both Andrew, Ann, and of course, Lindsay, for the help putting this together. And of course, Trial and Error Productions. We wouldn't have anything like this without their help. So thank you all. And I just want to close out to all of our donors who are still here and our guests. There's still a bunch of you here, so thank you for hanging on to the end. There are a lot of people. This has been an opportunity for us to showcase some of the amazing things the library has. And the Hugh and Jane Ferguson were truly, they're the underpinning of this. And their daughter Ellen has continued to support the library, and we just so appreciate that. And another major player in our life is Suzanne Hitman. And Suzanne served on the foundation board. She's part of our emeritus board. And she has a lovely collection that includes materials from the Pike Place Market and the story behind her family and all kinds of interesting things. And Paul Dorpat, I'm so glad what you have. And there are some other kind of amazing things that I'm aware of that are in the works that will lend itself to digitization of some really unique things that SPL only will have copyright access to. So it's just an example of the kinds of things that our library is so fortunate. And it's because your work is great and the community values it, and you do a good job of taking care of things. So thank you for that. I'll just close with a few last things, because if you haven't been using the library curbside service, it's like this amazing concierge service is up and running at 11 locations, and the latest is Beacon Hill and Southwest. If you're interested in finding out more, you just go to spl.org/curbside, and you can see where it is. And then in terms of Zooming and online stuff, huge thanks to my team for just diving into this and making things possible. So for instance, we have a Basics of Estate Planning that's coming up on November 12th. And we're doing that in partnership with the King County Library Foundation. And then our own local Ron Chu, the recently published My Forgotten Seattle, will have an author event with him on the 17th. And so those are two examples of things that are coming up. And if you want to register, we're happy. Contact the foundation office. We'll get you registered for each of those. And then lastly, of course, none of this would be happening without the support of our great donors. And it is fundraising season. So we're kicking off our fall fundraising, and we have a $50,000 matching challenge grant. So if you haven't heard from us yet, chances are you'll hear from us either through the mail or through email. But to have a matching grant like that, or a challenge grant is a match, is incredibly valuable, and it doubles your gift. So best time ever to take care of that. And I think just to close, to say tomorrow's Veterans Day. The library will be closed, but it's really to say thank you to our veterans and their families and all who have served our country. And we are just thankful for so many things. So especially you too. And with that, I think I just want to say so long, and do all join us again. Thank you.